So one of the other things that people will learn about me as we continue to do this podcast is that one of my favorite films is The Big Lebowski. And all this week, I had one specific quote from that movie running through my head each and every day as I looked at what the market was doing. And I checked all over the internet to see about copyright, and it's kind of a mixed bag. It seems like you can get away with using short clips from movies on podcasts and things like that. But I always err on the side of caution, being in the financial industry and in compliance for a good chunk of that. Always err on the side of caution. So unfortunately, that means you're going to have to put up with my Sam Elliott impersonation. The quote is a section where the stranger, the cowboy, says, "Darkness washed over the dude, darker than the black steers took us on a moonless prairie night. There was no bottom." I think about that every day as I've watched the market seesawing up and down and thinking that as a way to kind of lighten my mood as I think about all of my friends who are financial advisors and all of the stress that they are going through. And to open up our main topic today, I want to start with an anecdote that, as I was researching this anecdote, which I've told this anecdote probably for 20 years. I heard it very, very, very early on in my career, so 96, 97, 98, somewhere around there. And I've told it as a true story because I thought it was, and I looked for it, and it is nowhere to be found. So it must be actually an urban myth. I will give this, but it's a great story and a great illustration for our episode today. So I'm going to tell it, but just know this is an urban myth. So the story goes that after the 1987 crash, the end of that day, the head of one of the big investment banks was being interviewed by a news reporter, and in the course of the interview, the reporter asked, "What are you going to do if tomorrow the same thing happens?" And the investment banker thought about it for a brief second and just simply responded, "We will participate." And by that, he meant the fact that this was really out of his control, and it's a great lead-in to our discussion today. Episode 2 of the Valuability Podcast, The Best of Times, Communicating with Clients in Volatile Markets. Today we're going to be talking about the acronym BEST. We talked about it briefly last week, but we want to go into it in more detail. And then also we're going to be talking about the 3 buckets of control. So the things you can control, things you can influence, and things you can't control. So there are a couple of different 3-bucket topics that we will cover. This one is about managing yourself and managing the things that you can control and focusing on those. So the Valuability Podcast for financial advisors, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. Right now, because of the continuing events unfolding and the market volatility, we are really focusing in on financial advisors and helping them out. My name is Danforth Fleek. I'm joined every week by Philip Simonson. Philip, how have you been hanging in there this week?
Been a lot of time, Dan, on the phone with advisors. As we alluded to last time, it's a lonely island out there, and a lot of them are feeling a lot of stress and anxiety as a result. And I think the topic we're going to discuss here today is very pertinent. You made just in your intro, it made me think about a couple things. One, we are in hell, and the quickest way through hell is through the middle. There's no doubt about it. you can't avoid it. So we're going to talk about ways that you can get control of yourself and your emotions and your critical thinking skills so that you can be there for your clients. The other piece that it caused me to think about, Dan, was, if you can't manage yourself, then you're not going to be able to manage others. So learning how to manage oneself, and first starting with I would just call it self-awareness, knowing that this external stimuli that's coming in every day, and boy, it's these commentators on the Squat Box. They're there to sell news because that's how they get their commercial revenue. They say things are bad, but you know what? They're going to get worse. They know exactly which triggers to push. We're hardwired as creatures to react emotionally first, and then that sends people into a frenzy. And
Right.
But if you can control it, then if you can see that you can control yourself, and you can, that's learning more social awareness skills then, because that self-aware is learning those triggers and then how to manage, those triggers when they do occur. And then we're going to talk more about that today. And then if you can then become more social aware of knowing how you're coming across to others during these difficult times, then you're going to be in a better position of being able to help influence those individuals.
Right. I mean, the bottom line is if you're not in control, you have no chance of helping your clients correctly. Like, you might a little bit, but you really need to be centered and calm in order to be truly effective in these situations. So I absolutely think that our topics will help with, definitely will help with that. Check out our podcast wherever you find your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn. We also upload each episode to our YouTube channel. Search for Value-Ability on YouTube to find that. And then also you can find everything at value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and wherever you find us, like, review, subscribe, share, thumbs up, feedback, please give us that. It is very important for us. You can also sign up for our mailing list at value-ability.com and click on the Contact Us button. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our accounts on both of those are at value_ability. So with that, I will jump into the 3-bucket strategy. And again, this is something that, and one day we're going to cover something that you didn't teach me, Philip,
Okay.
from my standpoint. But today is not that day. So the 3 buckets is something I again learned very, very early on, and Philip taught me, and it was really, truly transformational. I was a horribly anxious child, moved around a bunch as a kid. I was always the new kid. My dad was in the Navy. Every 2 years, I was the new kid. I was constantly worried about fitting in. I was constantly worrying about other people and other things, and really things that I couldn't control. And so when Philip taught me the 3-bucket concept, it really did turn a corner for me in being able to focus a little bit more on the things that I could control. And so briefly, what the 3-bucket concept is that there are 3 main areas. Bucket 1 is the things you can directly control. They are the things that you can impact through your own actions. It is okay to worry about those, and it's okay to focus on those. Bucket 2 is things that you cannot directly control, but things which you can influence. Now, it is also okay to pay some attention to that. However, realize the amount of impact that you can have. And it definitely is subordinate to bucket 1. Bucket 1 is where you want to spend most of your time. Mm-hmm. And then bucket 3 are things which you can neither control nor influence. And spending any time worrying or focusing on those things is a complete waste. and not only that, it also will drive you mad. It is because you can't control it, you can't influence, and no matter what you do, you're really screaming at the sea. Like there is just, and for most people, it really is something of the magnitude of nature that you're worrying about. Like the market, like it is a force no one can control. It is the ocean. It is a thunderstorm. It is a tornado or a hurricane. It is not listening to you. It is not listening to me. And it's not listening to any human. And spending your time focusing on that is taking away from, especially from bucket one, which is the things which you can directly control and where you can have your most impact. Now, I get most of that.
That is spot on, Dan. You are absolutely right. And the thing that, a couple things I'll just add to it, that bucket one item, and you the things that go inside that bucket, as you referenced, that's our emotions. You can control your emotions. Then you can, from your emotions and identifying those emotions, and most of them come down to sad, glad, or mad. Then you can do the thinking, and that's the critical thinking skills that one is going to need, particularly in this time, to take away all that clutter and that emotional and all that the sound bites we're getting, and just truly look at facts. And we're going to cover more of that when we get to the best. But then it's your actions. But the interesting thing on bucket one, those things that we can control, it comes primarily down to your activities, as you said. That's all you can focus on. You can't control the results and or what's going to happen to you. But what you can control is how you're going to respond to what happens to you.
Right. Absolutely. And also in that, in terms of controlling your emotions, also realize that a large part of that, as we've mentioned last episode and also so far in this episode, that you are hardwired to react in certain ways, right? Mm-hmm. Fear is a hardwired emotion that is built from self-preservation over, hundreds, thousands, millions of years into you biologically. And the thing that I always try to point out to people in those situations is don't beat yourself up about being afraid. Like, you're going to be afraid. Right? It's big documentary watcher and countless different soldiers who have fought in combat say the same thing, which is if you say you're not afraid, you're lying. If you're in combat, you're afraid. And it's a human emotion. It's the way that you react to that, to that fear that's most important, and that applies to all events that are fearful. Yes, you are going to be afraid. Things are uncertain. It is how you interpret that fear and then how you let it impact your actions that's really most important.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. And psychologists, I think there's a distinction I'd like to make here between fear and what the psychologists will tell us. Fear has a specific cause. Example, confronting a saber-toothed tiger in the woods. All right, that's actually there, physically there. That's fear. But anxiety, that deals with causes that are less defined and often vague. And a lot of us right now, advisors, planners, their clients, and just us as individuals. It's been fearful for me this week, and it's turned that fear, as I recognize it more and more, it's anxiety. And it's because we don't have the answers right now, and we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. So one of the best things that you can do, and there's this is from Myra, S. White, she's a PhD clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School. And she focuses on workplace performance. That anxiety, if not treated, it creates cognitive distortions. And cognitive distortions will weaken one's judgment, and then when it impairs the decision making, and consequently leads to more mistakes.
Right.
And right, and there's been a study that's been done, and is that you know to sustain optimal performance, and you've got to, our advisors, we have to take care of ourselves at this time so that we can be there for clients. But it comes down to talent. That's things you're born with. Skills are things that are developed. And then it's decision making. And decision making is 2 times more powerful than talent and skills. So where I'm going with this is one of the hardest things that an advisor and we all have to do is teach people how to think and think critically so then they can make good decisions. So I just wanted to add that in, Dan, and if appropriate, there are different techniques that to reduce your stress level, because when you've got this high stress, and this is where it can become harmful. There's good stress and there's bad stress. Good stress is this: it's a short-term impact on you. And think about it, you're getting ready to go on a vacation. Well, that week before you go on vacation, it's just amazing. What I've always personally found is I've got increased intensity, and my focus is increased, and how much I can get done. That's good stress. Now, bad stress, we're going to be into this for, this is our second week into the unknown of the, there was, what did Sam say? We're down in that, there's no bottom here, or we're in hell.
Right.
We don't know how long this is going to go, but if you don't, what you got to start doing is taking care of yourself during this time period. And some of the things that you can do to reduce your stress, particularly, so you can control that bucket 1 before you start going to see your clients at this time. One, if you're gonna see them or call them, one of the first things I'd recommend you do is just start, press that pause for cause button before you pick up that phone, and catch yourself. And that pause for cause button, what you're doing when you're pressing it, catch yourself. And it's that self-talk that occurs between one's ears, and it's about 6 inches. And that's that little Jiminy Cricket or Slick Willie talking to you. You want to find out, hit the button. Okay, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? And what am I actually doing? And then if you can do that, you're going to start learning to become more self-aware. And if the next thing what you should consider doing here when you're doing that, we call that the freeze game, write down what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, I'm doing. But ask yourself then, in this circumstance, are my feelings, thoughts, and actions aligned with my goals and values? And is there a better choice that I could be making right now? Then also, when this anxiety is so high, our body releases a drug or a hormone, called cortisol. And that cortisol is a brain inhibitor. And particularly when there's high anxiety, fear, angst, anger going on, it's wired in us from Neanderthal times. The flight or fight syndrome takes off. Amygdala hijack, some people would call it. And that cortisol, that drug, hormone, gets released. It's a brain inhibitor. From allowing you to access the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And that prefrontal cortex of your brain, that's where reasoning, logic, and thinking occur, and planning. So you want to, because the reason why it does that is that fight or flight, it's got to save the oxygen because you might have to run off. So take 3 deep belly breaths. Those, and when you're taking those 3 deep belly breaths, imagine a person you love or a beautiful place in nature, and hold that image.
A really positive memory. That's another. Whether it's for me, The memory that I go to is being a kid, sitting on the floor in front of my record player, playing records and singing. It's a memory that my mother always reminded me of when I was a kid. I'd get down, she would find me sitting in my room alone, just singing away with my records, and it's just a super positive memory for me. And it's kind of my go-to image, where like in sports psychology, they talk about an image that you focus on that helps you perform. This is very similar. It's an image or a person or an idea that centers you around feelings of positivity, because all of that emotion is run through the part of your brain that also regulates memory. And so those memories and those feelings are very closely tied together.
Beautiful. That's exactly right. And I learned this from a gentleman, Aberman, and Dr. Aberman, and he teaches. He trains and teaches. I think Major League. I won't say the different and National Football League and many Big Ten colleges. He'll go in and he'll teach him this technique you just described, particularly with the closer. He's got to come in, and it's the bottom of the ninth, and he's got two people on base, and he's taking over a full count, and there's one out. They better center themselves real quick. How do they do that? Well, if there's a camera present, you'd probably see him, taking these deep belly breaths and those eyes closed, position himself to a place where they can center themselves and take control of those emotions at that time.
Now, and would you say as well that, making calls, you do that self-check and you can't get control, that you just take some time off from taking calls or making calls? Like, if you can't rein that back in, your best option is to say, you know what, I'm going to cool it for a while until I can get back into that place.
Absolutely. You right now, again, if you as we kick this thing off, you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. So if you're not in that position of being able to control your own emotions, your own thoughts, and your own actions, then hit that pause for cause button, and by not making the call. Now, to help you, one of the questions we got from our listeners from last week was, what are some things I can do to help be proactive in working with my clients during times like this? Well, one thought I had is... and a suggestion I would recommend is, you could text your clients before the call, or you could send them an email. Look, I'll be giving you a call in the next 24 hours. If you need me more urgently, please, feel free to give me a call. But I'm on the phone quite a bit right now. But I'd like to schedule this time, and to help make sure this is a purposeful meeting, what one or two outcomes do you want from this meeting so you can say it's time well spent? That is good knowing going into that meeting ahead of time, because oftentimes what we're doing, we're playing that self-talk, that head game. We're projecting the worst case scenario.
Right.
And this will help you prepare. And as we said last time, probably the major thing that they want to talk about is, and we'll get to this later, but is just how are they feeling, if you recall from that survey. But that's a great question. So that is one way. Let's just reiterate: take a pause. Step away. Go do something for yourself to help you throw off that discouragement. It might be, go work out. The other thing you can do is, to help you reduce this stress, is the food you can eat. And just know food with vitamin C helps fight that jump in that stress hormone, cortisol. So, and that folic acid is a natural mood lightener. So berries, guacamole, mixed nuts, oranges, those are, dark chocolate, chai tea, all good stuff.
Awesome. Now, I will just point out, if your firm does not allow you to text clients, don't don't text them. The
Thank
compliance
you.
guy will step in there and say that. But point very well taken. Maybe send an email, something that is allowable by your firm. And with that, let's transition into the piece that we're going to be sharing with people out on our website. You can find all of our supporting documents at value-ability.com. Click on the episodes button and look under the section for episode 2, the best of times. And with that, let's transition into that piece, Philip. And we are calling it the best of times in is it confusing times or controversial times or I named it. I can't remember the exact name of the piece, but we talked about this a little bit last week. You very briefly went through the acronym, but we wanted to go back and go into it in more detail because I think it is a core piece of trying to communicate effectively with clients in these volatile markets.
Sure. And Dan, what you did, and I thought it was very appropriate, the name, it's use the best of times during challenging times.
There it is, challenging times.
Challenging times. And in times of crisis, this is when leadership is revealed. In times of prosperity, it's concealed. So, actually presidents always, many of them wanted to have a crisis occur while they were president, because that could be that's their defining moment and how they respond. Now, I'm not going to get into politics here or religion and anything else, but my point with this and segueing in, these are challenging times. This is a time of crisis. They, your clients need to see someone who's in control, who has a calm demeanor, is more statesmanlike, and can just decipher through all this noise and get to the facts and help them make effective decisions during this time period. And because again, that cognitive distortion, when that occurs, it as we talked about, it's going to stop people from thinking clearly. And oftentimes they start projecting. And what I call that is they go to the school of MSU without knowing the facts. They go in MSU. Dan and I live in Minnesota. That isn't Minnesota State University. It isn't Montana State University. It's make it up, right? And they're going to be making a lot of stuff up, and you need to call them. And one of the first things you've got to do is you've got to have the belief. And that first B, as part of that acronym BEST, belief. You got to demonstrate to them belief in the long-term plan you've laid out. And equities do play a role in that long-term plan. And it's the foundation for them to ultimately achieve their goals. And, again, in our last episode, and I think it's worth noting here, asset allocation during turbulence times is always it's a good thing to fall back on. Now, with that, Dan, you mentioned this last time, and it's a fool's game. Try to time the market, and I just want to, if you take a look at there's a study, and you'll see it. I think, Dan, we have it out on our website, but from 1999 through 2018. If you were stayed fully invested, you would have had an annual return of 5.6%. Now, mind you, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since that, the 99. You had the .com crash, you had 9/11, you had 2008, but you would have had a 5.6% rate of return. If you just missed out on the 10 best days in that time period, you would have reduced the growth of your initial investment by more than half. It would have been a 2% rate of return. The 20 best days is, it would have been minus 0.3%. But keep this in mind. If even if you think you'll just wait out for a few weeks to see what happens, you got to keep in mind that 6 out of the 10 best performing days for the S&P 500 during that 20-year period occurred within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days.
Right. I think it's important there to also focus in not just on because we've all seen things like this, right? This is a long piece, and actually the dates you updated the dates. I think you're using one from the original piece.
Correct. Yeah,
you
yeah.
used on the piece that we have on our site. It's the beginning of '05 to the beginning of this year, and the numbers are a little bit better because you cut out the .com bust and all of
Correct.
that, and you get the
9/11.
run up, yeah, and you get the run up to the financial crisis. But still, it's 9% fully invested, 4.13 missing the 10 best days. But we've all seen this, and over all time periods, it looks exactly the same, right?
Correct.
In terms of staying fully invested versus not. The more important thing, I think, though, is focusing it back on why did we choose equities, right? Like, what was it about equities that we picked? And almost universally, that is keeping pace with inflation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so, again, it's going back to that goal, going back to that value. Because I can say to the person all day long, well, hey, you want an extra 5% return? That doesn't register when in a heightened emotional state. But do you still want to retire? Do you still want to leave money to your kids? Do you still want to be able to travel in retirement? Do you still want to, whatever that goal is a much better way of getting people to refocus on good things in their life. So you're basically trying to do the same thing with them that we were just talking about in terms of focusing them on something positive, some outcome that they're looking to achieve. Now, these numbers back that up, but the focus is, why did we pick equities, and has that reason changed? Because if that reason hasn't changed, then we don't need to change the equity exposure.
Well, exactly, Dan. And so in preparation, again, bucket one, things that you can control in your critical thinking, that then is going to help you make help an individual make better decisions, which, bucket two are things you can influence. And what you're trying to do here now is influence your clients to make a good decision to stay the course. So I would recommend some of these specific items, before you pick up the phone and dial them. If you've done a plan with these clients with the current numbers, see how they stand right now. Again, rerun them, redo the plan, see how they're going to do against their goals with the current level of their assets in regard to, will they still be able to achieve the goal with what they currently have with this downturn?
Yeah, that's a great point. Going back to the actual plan, if you're going to focus on the numbers, not just focusing on the percentage return, but going back and saying, hey, we're still on target.
Correct.
To meet that goal. That's
a peace of mind. So, then look, we kick this thing off, take a look at the client's asset allocation, particularly the one bucket or the wedge in that pie of international. This is just my thoughts. Again, take what you like, leave the rest. But you might want to if the client doesn't want to stay the course, and they're looking for ideas from you, then maybe reposition some of those international, the international exposure, and think of things that you can bring it back here to the U.S. Maybe look at bigger blue chips with the dividend play. But the reason why I suggest this is, we're in uncharted waters. And one thing I do know about this country, we have more arrows in our quiver to, with the Federal Reserve, with what we're doing, to handle these types of crises. So I would, if there's going to be any repositioning, that's one of the buckets in my asset allocation I would reposition, Dan.
Yep. So we covered the B, the belief, obviously. The next step the next letter in the acronym E for empathy.
Yeah, let me just say this right out of the gate with this one. Don't ever say, I understand. I understand how you feel. You can never understand how they're feeling. You can empathize with how they're feeling. There's a big distinction there. So don't use the word understand. because that could trip their trigger. No, you can't. You can't understand. You're not in my shoes right now, but I can empathize with how you're feeling. This one is that with the 4 R's. This is the first R. Recognize how they're feeling. Touch their heart before the brain. And as advisors, we're all hardwired. I just went right into it and told you about the 10 best days, the 60 best days, 20 best days. We have all that. That's in your back pocket, but not out of the gate. Not out of the gate. I like to say, one way to, I'm going to reiterate, if you can email them or if your company allows the text, what are the 1 or 2 outcomes you want from this upcoming meeting? So this you can say this has been time well spent. If you can get that done, great. Get it done, because that's going to get them, he's listening to me, she's listening to me. This is going to be a good meeting. Versus if you don't have that time, again, what are you currently feeling would be a great question to open up with, because the what makes a person go internal. And if you use the word why, should have, would have, could have, stay away from those words. Those are all shaming words. And shame is when you feel badly about yourself. Guilt is when you feel badly about your behaviors. Stay away from shaming. It's a trigger from their parents, those emotional triggers. Stay away from that. But think about, hey, what, you might even start, when I start off training sessions, before we begin, does anyone have any squids on their face? And a squid is, it's got 8 tentacles. It's covering my face. I can't focus in on what you're going to say until I get this squid off. So This is allowing them to get the squid off, Dan. That's the E.
Well, and that's also, too, I'm really into wordsmithing, specific wordsmithing. What you said in that question was, how are you feeling? Very different question than how are you doing? How are you doing is a pre-programmed greeting that establishes or gets back a pre-programmed response. I'm fine. I'm okay.
Those are nondescript feelings, by the way. Fine.
Right.
I got a acronym for that. Fine, but I can't say.
Right.
Things stay on the. What you say can stay out there for generations. So I'm not going to.
Right. Right. But it's so what are you feeling gets them to actually think about what they're feeling, rather than just how are you doing? Are you hanging in there? And are you hanging in there is a closed end question. Those kind of things. Those are kind of seemingly empathetic questions, but they're not really. Like, going right to the heart of it. What are you feeling is a great way to start that conversation.
Yeah.
So then we transition over to trust.
Or support.
We'll go to
support.
Support is the next one. Yeah. So
the big S. And this is where, again, tying the tools together, use the 3 R's. So once you recognize how they're feeling, then the next R is you are going to reflect. Let's reflect back. And you started this earlier in your conversation, and you alluded to, why did we, when we first put together the plan, what were your goals? And have they changed? And again, time frames are, link in the time frames. Is this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 3 years from now? We probably won't even remember what's occurred based upon past history and how the markets respond to what's occurring here today. And so, think about, reflect, then reframe from the big picture, what's going on, and this is when you can use your historical data to educate them and provide them with the facts. And then the last R is, okay, how do you want to respond? And the great question, what do you want to do in response to all this? Or how do you want to respond? Help them make that decision, but let them know it's going to be their decision. And right. And so, and decision making, particularly if their emotions are still high, what I would share with you, 2 things. 1, make reversible decisions quickly, irreversible decisions slowly. Like a good judge, when the verdict comes in from the jury, they do not do the sentencing that day. They've been taught your emotions are too high. You'll come back to that. President Lincoln practiced it as well. He would write the letter, wanted to firing the general, then he'd put it in the desk, and when he finished the letter in a drawer, excuse me, and then he would reread it within 24, 48 hours. And if he still felt the same way, then he fired it off.
Yeah, I have retroactively decided not to sell my entire portfolio probably 20 times in my life from doing just that. Like, you know what? Close the computer, watch a TV show, relax for a little bit, think about it. And actually, most of the time, I end up just forgetting about it by the time. But in times of high stress, I've, also another thing you taught me, you can never be truly objective about your own investments. So,
Right.
Even as professionals, we go through that. What should I be doing for my own stuff? So I've gone through that process of, I got to get out. What if this, what if that, what if the tenants in my, house move out, and I am stuck paying the entire mortgage, so that kind of talk, okay, you've made that decision. Before I go ahead and liquidate your entire portfolio, here's what I recommend. Let's sit on it overnight, and if you still want to do that, just shoot me an email tomorrow and say yes, what we decided, or probably also from a compliance standpoint, they would need to call you again.
I think that's right, Dan. And what I would do, two things I'll add to that. One, another great question to ask them after you've reframed it from a big picture and reviewed everything and shared with them the facts, and you've asked them what would you like to do right now, and how would you like to respond to this situation. And after you've listened to them, ask, and then you could ask them, would you like to hear what my response or what my views are on this? And that's a nice segue then for you to enter in your views on that one. So,
right. And then the last letter in the acronym is just T, trust. And that is then, if you do the first three, it should really build a sense of trust with you and your clients, right?
Correct. And depending on how, depending on how you've set up the initial interview too, lessons from this type of market, a great question to ask your clients in the initial interview is, if we're sitting down 3 years from today and you said we've had a successful relationship, what must happen in order for that to occur? Well, that's all about managing expectations. So one of the things you could ask them, around communication, client service, what are you expecting? Then you can share your expectations. And remember, teaching a person how to think is, the hardest thing we have to do. And that's one of our roles, is teaching our people your clients how to think. Because you might, particularly for the day in which you're not there, you want to make sure you're leaving something behind. But with that, teaching them how to think and managing expectations, if one of those things where, hey, I expect you to, if the market's down, I want to be hearing from you. And if you don't make that call during that time, because this whole thing is use the best of times during the challenging times, during this times of crisis, leadership's revealed, you need to be there. And if you said you were going to be there, that's your words. And then if your behaviors, you actually do make the call, your words and behavior match, you have now what's called integrity. If you say you're going to do something, but then don't do it, you don't have integrity, and now you have trust issues. If you have integrity, the byproduct that's created is trust.
Absolutely. So we've run a little bit long on the main section, so let's transition over to our article section, unless you have any other points to wrap up.
No, Dan, that's it for me.
Perfect. So this week, again, it is articles that angered me, raised my fur, and it's actually 3 different articles. I'll give you the title of each article, and you can find these. I will tweet them out on our Twitter feed at value_ability. They'll also be available on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes button and look under episode 2, and the links will be there. So the 3 articles. First one, goes back a ways, October 21st, 2007. 20 years later, could markets crash again? October 19th, 2017, 10 years later. 30 years after Black Monday, could stock markets crash again? January 19th, 2020. Stock market checks 3 out of 4 boxes that triggered the 1987 crash. So my first response to this is, if you wake up every day and say, today it's going to rain, eventually you're going to be right. Just because the first one happened before the financial crisis, and this last one, the January 19th, 2020, happened before this crisis. The really interesting thing to me about all of these articles is that all of these articles focused on the same concept, which was, hey, the market looks exactly the way that it looked right before the 1987 crash. The things that are happening in today's market are what happened right before. Even that last one says it. Checks 3 out of the 4 boxes that triggered the 1987 crash. And those boxes are: the market makes huge gains beforehand. 2, market euphoria reigns. 3, sharp downturns precede the crash. 4, financial innovation backfires. While some of these things are true, the fact is that the downturn in 2009 that preceded, or that was after the first article, and this downturn were triggered by vastly different things than the 1987 crash. And so these types of articles, these are the types of things that your clients are reading. These are also the types of things that you are reading as an advisor. And my biggest thing in focusing in on these articles, honestly, are, again, bucket 1, the things that you can directly control. I cannot stress enough how much better my life has become since I stopped watching what I call entertainment news. And that is literally 95% of what's on television. I was sitting in a Walmart in 2009, March of 2009, the bottom of the financial crisis, and I was listening to a radio a broadcast that was talking about, this is the beginning of the next Great Depression, we're going to go to 25% unemployment, and blah, 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 doom, 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 doom. And I then realized that I was sitting in a parking lot listening to the rest of that radio show, so that I could go in and do what I was there to do. But I was
buy your
sitting
TP.
in... Right. Yeah, I was going to get out of my wagon that I drove because I don't have gas for my car. I was going to get out of my car and walk a mile through the freezing rain at the Walmart because the Walmart parking lot was completely full. And I thought to myself, this is not what my grandfather experienced in the Great Depression or even the lead up to the Great Depression. And I literally turned off entertainment news at that point. And I have listened on purpose to maybe 10 minutes of that type of news since then. And my life is so much better for it. Now, I do still read what I call selected, trusted sources. There are sources that I trust, but specifically, I also have learned I have turned off all of my notifications on my phone. My phone notifies me of nothing. I don't get Facebook alerts. I don't get news alerts. I even learned I had to turn off my ESPN alerts because ESPN alerts would be like, hey, COVID-19, this star. Like, also triggers those things. And when we're being barraged by that negative information, it is really difficult to control your emotions. So I very specifically have times during the day that I sit down and I purposefully go to the news that I want to read, and I read it. And not especially with the phone, I didn't really realize how really insidious it is to have all of those alarms flashing at you all day. But it has really changed my life. from that standpoint. I do not get just barraged with negativity all day. I go and I read the things. I'm like, all right, yeah, okay, things are kind of negative. But then I'm able to step back into the world of the things that I can control. Now, I have argued over and over and over with advisors who say it is, quote, their job to read everything and be instantaneously aware of absolutely everything. And I can tell you, for the 7 years that I was calling on financial advisors and clients, that I didn't do this. I was never uninformed to the point that an advisor or a client was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that you didn't know that. Like, you get the news. Especially, you go and find it when you want it. You still get the news. It's the manner in which you get it. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to you for your thoughts on these articles.
I'm pretty good, Dan. With that, I'll just keep it real simple. I agree with everything you said right there. Applaud you for getting rid of that external stimuli, all those alerts, because those are just triggers that are going to create different emotions in your brain, and look out, off you go, you're running. And that's a good practice. The key thing in all three of those scenarios in those articles, what has not changed is the follow the herd mentality. That's the one thing that's consistent. They all might have been tripped by different crises, but they're all the same. So that's what I picked up on there, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, we will transition over to our question section. And actually, you had already alluded to one of them and gave one of your answers. What are some practical ways to be proactive managing your clients' expectations? And do you have any other things to add to that question?
I'll just reiterate, the one is you can send out the email to an initial interview. That question, I'll repeat it. If we're sitting down 3 years from today and you said we've had a successful relationship, what must happen in order for that to occur? And let's talk about communication. We know one thing. If this is a planning process by nature, it's going to be a long-term process. Then the markets are going to go up and they're going to go down. We might even face a crisis. You might want to ask them, what are you looking for from me during this time of crisis?
Right.
And then, and then find out what's the best mode of communication for them. Is it phone? Is it email? And if your broker deal allows it, is it text? Find it out. And what's a reasonable amount of time to get a hold of them? And manage your expectations. If it's a crisis, look, give me some time here, because I've got, a number of clients, but, if I can get a hold of you if it's 72 hours, or at least, my first touch base, but you can always call me. And, if it's burning and you need some walking off the cliff, here's the best times: from 8:30 to 9, from 11:30 to 12, and 4:30 to 5. Otherwise, I'm generally in meetings. So give them some times when it's best to get a hold of you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also in managing client expectations, the big one is finding out what their expectations are. I think so many people approach, and it's not just financial advisors, but in business in general, they say, I'm going to contact you at least once a month, or I'm going to contact you at least once a quarter. And the client isn't expecting that level of service, right? And so you end up, the death of any level of integrity is what? Over committing and underperforming.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Amen.
That's it, right? So you don't need to, be a superhero. You don't need to, this is what I do for all of my clients. Find out what their expectations are. Look, if their expectations are that, and that's acceptable to you, great.
If not, don't take them on as a
right.
client.
Yeah, and from the other standpoint, you're also probably going to be bothering them. Like, if their expectations are they want to talk to you once a year, if you're calling them once a quarter, it's going to be bugging them. So on the other side, you're doing more harm than good by setting those unreasonable expectations if it's something that they aren't even interested in. So then, second question, what can be learned from this specific market downturn? I'll start off with this one. For me, in particular, I got a text from one of my very best friends the other day, just kind of saying, wow, man, I can't imagine that. I never imagined that I would be living through a pandemic. And it was interesting. My response to it when I sat back and I thought was, the one thing 2008, 2009 taught me was two things. The one thing that it taught me was two things. The two things that it taught me were this. Number one, anything can happen. Like before the 2008 downturn, I always said, credit markets aren't going to freeze. We're not going to have a situation where the entire economy might collapse. And you know what? We took a really good look at it back then. And we came back from that precipice. But what it taught me was, anything is possible. And so as this started to pop up, I haven't been taking it from this as all that much of a shock. It's not something I expected, but it also wasn't in the realm of, aliens landing on Earth and enslaving us. That is something I can reasonably say I'm not going to experience in my lifetime. But other than that, things happen. Yes, pandemics happen. These things do happen. We have lived through them before. We will live through this one, and things will continue. The Earth will continue to spin, and humans will continue to exist. And secondly, the thing, and this is more of really a blessing, which is that the extraordinary things that I have lived through are, a huge financial crisis, and now this crisis. They're not a world war. And I've been lucky enough to live during a time in which I've experienced no massive world wars. And so that was the second takeaway I had from that conversation was, you know what? Yes, this is a crisis, but in the grand scheme of things, I will take this crisis versus some of the things other people have had to live through in history. So with that, Sai, what are the things you've learned from this specific downturn?
To piggyback on what you just finished with is, I think during times of crisis like this, be kind to yourself. Be mindful of things that you can be grateful for, so you don't get depressed and get in a spiraling downturn of. I would encourage people. What I do is being mindful. What are 3 things I'm grateful for each and every day, and grateful for the abundance. Grateful for food on the table and a roof over my head, or my family, to remind me of the things I still have. Then secondly, it's never, it's a Warren Buffett line, the sage from the stage. During times, when the tide goes out, you can see who's been swimming naked.
Right.
How many times do we set up our clients to not be prepared for something like this? And we'll talk about this another time, but don't fully invest all their money. Back out how much money they're going to need in the cash reserve. We'll talk about bucket 1 money, money that you're not going to need for 1 to 2 years. So you can, if we hit a crisis, you can still sleep at night, and that money is going to be there. Too many times I see advisors, they just go vest it all. Well, no, it's probably not a good thing to do. So more on that latter one in another episode.
Absolutely. So with that, wherever you listen to us, respond, or you can go to our Twitter account at @value_ability and let us know what is a unique method that you use for managing client expectations. The one that popped into my mind that I've heard of that, again, I think is an urban myth is the guy that kept a pallet of bricks in his office and gave each client a brick so that when the market dropped, they could tie a check to it and throw it through his front window. That has to be an urban myth. Now, somebody might actually have had a brick on their desk, but having a whole pallet I don't think actually happened. But that's the one that popped into my mind. But share with us if you have a unique method that you use for managing client expectations, or if you've heard of one, share that with us on our Twitter account, or respond to us in the comment section wherever you listen to us. Now with that also as well, if you have questions or topics that you would like us to cover, again, our Twitter account is @value_ability. Tweet at us and let us know what your question or topic is, or you can go to value-ability.com and click on Contact Us. There is a form there to allow you to submit your questions and topics. There's also the mailing list right there, so while you're there, go ahead and sign up for our mailing list as well. And as always, I have to give the mantra again: like, review, subscribe, and share. Next episode, we're going to jump into, as Philip alluded to there just a second ago, strategies for managing assets through turbulent times. We're going to start out next episode with the 3-bucket strategy. It's I think you refer to it as the smart money strategy, Philip?
Correct, smart money.
And then the episode after that, we are going to cover a strategy that I have long used. Call it NFL Need, Fun, Love. It is based on the CFP income planning model, but we're going to share that with you in episode 4. So look out for both of those coming up. As always, thank you for listening. Join us again next week. The world will not end between now and then, so keep serving your clients, keep remaining positive, and join us next week. And remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.